Hey everyone, welcome to Cube Reviews episode 27. This is your host Ian Braverman. Today I am joined once again by May, also known as Myagic. How are you doing
Hi,
today?
that's me. I'm
It's
doing pretty
May.
okay.
Awesome, glad to hear. Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you again. We just had you
hmm
on 6 episodes ago on episode 21 where we discussed the Fey Cube, and it was a great time talking to you. And I was like, gotta get you on again soon so we could talk
hmm
more Cube. And of course, you're one of the hosts of the Uber Cube podcast, another
That I am.
fantastic Cube podcast.
I do a lot of podcasts. Or go figure, I just like talking about Cube. It's getting me to shut up is the hard part.
Hey, we all like talking about Cube here. That's why we're talking today. And of course, everyone go check out Uber Cube podcast on many platforms. And also, Anthony Adams on episode 17. So if people want to hear more Uber Cube content, go check that out.
Mhm.
And yeah, so how are you doing today? What's going on?
I mean, right now I'm just kind of sipping some tea. I'm not super happy with my combo. For context, I tend to have a bunch of like loose teas. So oolong, jasmine, anything from like dandelion root, rose hip, whatnot. So I tend to make my own little like blends. And I tried to go for like a jasmine hibiscus,
That
which
sounds
doesn't,
nice.
it's not as nice as I expected it to be, but I'm sipping it.
It's drinkable.
It's drinkable. The, like, have you ever seen The Cat Returns?
No, what's that?
So it's a Ghibli movie about essentially this girl who saves a prince cat and it ends up betrothed to that cat, and then she slowly turns into a cat. But there is a character in there called the Baron, and one of the things that he's known for is that, oh, this tea's my special blend. It's a little different every time. And then she's like, oh wow, this tea's delicious. And he's like, ah, then you were lucky. Sometimes that's how I feel with my teas.
It's like the jelly beans from Harry Potter. You have no idea what you're gonna get.
hmm
Awesome. And I mention it every week, but we play Cube at Games IRL, Avon, Connecticut. Be happy to be in the area. Come join us. And so, May, I know you were on just 6 episodes ago, and we already had you introduce yourself, but tell
hmm
us another short history of your history with magic for people who don't know you.
Sure. So I've been in the cube space since around 2020. I started making a name for myself based on the back of the fake cube because a lot of people were just generally interested in how the fake cube, exists. It was a flavor centric cube in a world of, I wouldn't say optimized cubes, but cubes where their identities existed to, these are the best cards in my slot for each particular archetype and everything's supposed to be tailored. And I just went, yeah, but these cards pretty. But outside of the novelty of it, I started just branching out more into the cube space. Obviously, as we said before, I'm on UberCube, and that's how a majority of people know me. I used to do a lot more on the former Twitter back when that was a real platform,
Better known as
AOMAO.
X.
But a majority of my experience in the Magic scene is, I would say, centered around Cube. I do make other things other than the fake cube, and I'm always excited to actually get the opportunity to talk about them.
Yes. Today we're talking about the Big Spender Microcube. But first, tell us a fun fact or a hobby about yourself that you haven't said before to the people.
Fun fact or hobby about myself. Well, okay. How about we do two truths and a lie? All right.
Okay, let's do it. Two truths and a lie. Let's hear.
Two truths and a lie. All right. So I used to do HEMA.
Hmm.
I love to do painting,
Hmm.
and I play quite a bit of Pokemon.
I think it's the Pokemon is the lie.
Nope, it's the painting. I actually can't stand physically painting. The
Ah, that's
texture of like
right.
the actual paint getting on my hands and whatnot is horrible stim. But
Well,
yeah, I used to do sword fighting and whatnot. It was a lot of fun.
that's super awesome. What's your favorite Pokemon game?
Heart Gold Soul Silver.
A
I
classic.
understand that it's a bit of the boring answer at this point, but like I like it. Makes me happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic. Can't go wrong with it.
Mhm. But anyways, we're not here to talk about Pokemon. We're here to talk about Cube.
Yes, a different card game.
Mm-mm.
And today we're talking about the Big Spender Microcube, which is a, as in the name said, microcube, it only has 81 cards in it. So what does it mean to be a microcube?
So I consider a microcube to be, let's say, a loose definition of it fits inside of a deck box. So it's about trying to fit that kind of cube-like experience in a very, very compact form. And I feel like that's kind of the essence of what makes a microcube. So if you have something, I would say less than 100 cards, roughly, because that's what about fits in a deck box, then it's probably a microcube.
Okay, so you would say it's different than a tubert.
So can be. It depends on what the experience is. So, for example, the big spender here, I think the best way to explain big spender is to kind of talk about the overarching idea of this, right? So this is meant to be either 1v1 or multiplayer, just right out the gate. So only having 81 cards, and there are no basic lands. You do not get basic lands. There's no land station. Does not matter. Does not exist. Instead, you start the draft with 50 treasures. And as the draft persists, you spend those treasures in order to buy cards. You all draft from the same pack. It's all face up. It's a 3x3 pack of 9. And you spend your treasures to buy the cards. The cards go directly into the deck. There is no deck building phase, and there is no deck limit. So you can have as few or as many cards you want in your deck, so long as you can actually afford them with the treasures. Then, once the drafting stage is over, you shuffle up all of your cards, all the cards that you bought, that is, and then go immediately into the playing. So why this matters is that it does a few different things. One is that it compresses the drafting stage. You're no longer having to make choices between cards that you're going to end up picking because there's not really free picks here. It's either you're paying treasures or you're paying opportunity cost, right? But you don't have to draft the cards. You can choose not to take anything. And if everybody chooses not to take cards from the pack gets discarded. Because after all, our goal here is to make an optimized little deck, so to speak. So compressing the game experience by taking out the deck building portion, by compressing the actual draft portion of it, by making it so that way everybody's kind of picking one card from one pack rather than a bunch of people having to decide within their own packs. So the fact that it is open face actually makes it go faster because then people are thinking about what they are interested in that pack while somebody else is drafting that same pack. So it actually speeds it up.
Yeah. So it being only 81 cards, including lands, like you said, it fits in a deck box. Do you just throw it in a purse or something, or in a little backpack, and then just bring it to the bar, or just bring it out to just have it on you at all times?
Mm-hmm. It was an experience that I designed for the express purpose of I wanted it to be able to fit in my purse. I wanted it to be able to be compact enough that I can carry it around and without carrying a bunch of extra bits, bobs, and whatnot. So that's why I didn't want a basic land station. I don't want a bunch of tokens and whatnot. The only complex quote unquote part of it is the fact that there's a lot of cards that involve counters. But the way that we offset this is by actually using the change, because I'm giving you physical change to represent your treasures, as also counters. So when you spend those treasures in order to buy things, you can also just re-put those pennies and whatnot onto your cards. So they double up as counters. So it actually makes it even more compact.
Oh, wow. That's such a fun way to do it.
Yeah.
So do you just literally give each player 50
cents.
pennies? Oh, very cool.
So it's not 50 pennies because, carrying around 200 pennies would be kind of ridiculous. It is essentially 4 quarters, 4 dimes, and then 8 nickels, and then 20 pennies. But I also have an additional dime, nickel, and 5 pennies on the side. So
is that another reason why it's called the big spender? You're using literal money?
Yeah. We're tripling it up here. Because not only are you having to spend your mana in order to buy the cards, you're also having to, use change as your currency, which is why it's the big spender.
Can it be like when I'm at a blackjack table and I can put in another $20 to buy back in?
No. As funny as it would be, no.
I want to buy back in.
The important part here is that when the game actually begins, you do not spend mana to cast your cards. Once you buy them for that initial cost to buy the card, put it into your deck, you no longer have to pay any more mana in order to cast it. You just buy it once. So now you have the context of, oh, all the cards I'm buying, are free spells.
Yes.
You still have to pay for like activated abilities and whatnot, but for the most part, you are paying for a spell that you can try to figure out ways to loop, to repeat, to get back and play again. So things that like return a creature from your graveyard to your hand is basically the same as a sorcery speed reanimate.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that later on in the episode, it's a really unique environment.
Mm-mm.
And with it being such a compact, tight list, only 81 cards, I also have a Tubert, which is definitely
Mm.
more cards than 81. And in my experience, each card in the list really has to serve a really important specific purpose when the cube has so few cards in it. For example, I often have to pick cards that are removal and also creature and also card draw to try and get as many different pieces of the puzzle into such a small amount of cards.
So there are a few ways that you can do it. Like you were implying that you can pick out cards that serve multiple functions, or I think the more important way is make the few cards that do exist either relatively efficient at what they do, like relative to the environment, or have what they do be very specific to like what their deck is trying to do. So let's take Balls Invoker, for example. Balls Invoker is 2 in a red for a 4/2 creature, and you can pay 8 as an activated ability to deal 4 damage to each opponent. Now, an astute person might realize, hey, if I draft like the most amount of cards while spending the least amount of treasures during that draft and then just slap down a Balls Invoker, I can win turn 1. However, the pack is face up. People will be able to see you going for the Balls Invoker and going for the Balls Invoker deck. They can actually start drafting the cards that are very specific at what they do. So, for example, Essence Scatter is particularly good. Lots of things that if they happen to go first, that they can get discards. There was a card in here that was Glorious End, where it's just, hey, I'm just going to end the turn now. And then you can try to find ways to like stifle that. But point is that I have a large suite of like interaction. So even though lots of things are happening on turn 1, there's also lots of ways to build that interaction into your deck with lots of different ways to either grab that or recur it or whatnot. So even though on paper it seems like, oh, we're trying to go for like the turn 1 wins, those aren't always the decks that end up winning because there's just so much interaction, recursion, and whatnot that building weird aggro piles or weird recursion value stuff ends up being the ones that stick out in the end.
Yeah. And so, like you mentioned, at the beginning of the draft, you get 50 treasures,
Mm-hmm.
and you can spend these treasures to either buy cards during the draft portion, or you can use them during the gameplay. I have a cube that's sort of similar to that. It's called my Gold Rush cube, and
Mm-hmm.
where players receive treasures during the gameplay, and then there's like a shop in the middle that players can purchase cards from the shop to put into their hand, and they use treasures to purchase cards from the shop.
Mm-hmm.
However, I actually do it a little bit different. For you, you have it be that you spend treasures equal to the mana cost of the card
Mm-hmm.
and put it in your deck. I actually wrote in Sharpie on mine a treasure cost on it.
Oh, that's cute.
So it's a little bit different than the mana cost. Have you considered doing different ways or different methods for this shop portion and the draft portion?
Uh, it is something that I've considered because there are a few cards that, let's say, dissuade people just because of their initial costs. So, like, let's take Lord of Shadowskull Pass, for example. This card is a 3 in a red, 3/3 Minotaur Shaman with level up. It costs an additional 1 in a red to level it up. Through levels 1 through 5, you get a 6/6, and then through 6 plus, it also gets the additional text of whenever it attacks, deals 6 damage to each creature defending player controls. Now, the reason that the big spender works the way it does is because I'm asking you to make big committal choices like Lord of Shadowskull Pass. It's not a matter of you trying to spend all that money up front as much as it's trying to find ways to get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. So it's actually better for you to start grabbing packages that care about Proliferate or Venerated Teacher, which just puts 2 level up counters on things and so on and so forth. And part of the kind of mini game that's introduced in the draft portion is actually introduced via the trying to get the most bang from your buck. So while I've considered doing it, so that way I can have like a separate cost on some of these cards, like at one point I considered the concept of scaling based on rarity rather than on mana cost. So that way it would just be a flat cost. But there are some cards that are actually more important to be, how do I put it, high committal, because the way that you're trying to build into it is through the actual drafting process. And that's kind of the fun part of it. So hopefully that makes sense. Eh.
Yeah. Are there any cards that you haven't been able to include or cards that you want to include, but because of it being purchased by treasures, being a little bit difficult to balance? Like, for example, a 10 cost card, that would be fantastic and maybe not broken, but just being 10 treasures just puts it out of the question. Or a one cost creature that may be too powerful for only being able to spend one treasure on it.
So I haven't had any specific examples like that come up, but I do know that there has been interesting challenges that have arisen because of the way that this format is structured. For example, I have a card in here called Salvager of Secrets. It's 3 blue blue for a 2/2, enters battlefield, return target instant sorcery, classic Archaeomancer type effect. I can't run Archaeomancer in here because 4 is too cheap for that effect. I want there to be a 6 mana version of this effect that has some other like miscellaneous upside. The reason why is because Salvager of Secrets, unironically, is one of the strongest cards in here. Because if you start throwing in ways to either loop that effect, bounce that effect, or whatnot, then there's ways that you can recur your powerful interaction cards or your burn cards or whatnot and get huge leads on people.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting that there are multiple effects at different mana costs, but not the
Yeah.
mana cost you would want it to be.
So I tend to actually find that I have the reverse problem where it's not, this is just too expensive. It's more of a, this is way too efficient because as soon as you buy it once, you never have to pay for it again. And because you never pay for it again, it does something stupid. So I would like it to be more expensive or more exclusive. Like I had to cut an internal witness out of here and swap it for Gloomshrieker because an Ewit would just be the same thing as like Archaeomancer, but better. Versus
Yeah.
Gloomshrieker has a very, very strong requirement of it has to be a permanent, and if it would die, you exile it. You do not get to like kill it, like sacrifice it, repeat it, and do stupid things with it. So needing more restrictions is actually what I'm hunting for.
Yeah, I would say that in some ways, this cube almost feels like a board game rather than a regular cube because
Oh yeah,
you don't have to care about colors. When you're playing the game, you cast everything for free,
yep,
and you only have a certain amount of resource that you can spend throughout the game, or it's all gone. It almost feels like every card that you draft, because you can only get a certain number, or you run out of treasures, or you can only spend so much on an individual card, feels like a board game would be to build a contraption to try and take down your opponent's deck.
yep. Like the main difficult part of where colors matter, at least for the moment, is specifically for the cost of some of the level ups. If you're trying to go for, say, quote unquote, fair mid range deck, where you just try to grab any of the lands, anything that taps for mana, anything that gives you like miscellaneous colored pips, and then trying to grab like the enchantments, like the talents, bandits talent, gossips talent, whatnot, where they are things that we are trying to spend a specific pip of mana in order to get into that you can only get through either spending the treasures, but you only get to do it once, or through buying the other things that lead into it, right? I want to throw in more cards that actually explicitly care about like certain colors or having protection of certain colors or whatnot to make the cards actually feel like that their color identity is relevant here. But on the other hand, I also just don't think that's the most relevant part of it.
Yeah, and so going back to the lands, like you mentioned, do the lands cost zero during the draft?
Yep.
Okay, so are they like an auto pick?
Uh, Believe it or not, no. There are decks that do want the lands, and there are a few different reasons that they're important in here. So, as you might have noticed, I have the vivid lands in here, so they enter tapped. This matters because when we are talking, people are dropping out their hands on turn one, having a tap land is kind of a big deal. But it's important because they cost 0 to grab and put into your deck. And when you don't have a deck limit, you can deck out. You can lose by decking out. So you start by drawing 7, just like a normal game. So you have to have at least 7 cards in your hand to make sure that you can play the game. Then you have to have an 8th card to make sure that you don't deck out on that first turn. And you need to have cheap ways to fill your deck. And the lands kind of fill that purpose. But they also act as a secondary purpose of they let some of these dirtier, mid-rangey style decks where they're just like, I'm not trying to go for the first turn one explosive plays and then just sitting on my hands, so to speak, because I ran out of things to do. For example, the Balls Invoker deck. I'm trying to go for the long haul of my creatures are just better than you and they turn sideways better. And they will eventually just outlive you. The lands serve that function because, like I said, the pips are what matter.
And you mentioned that there are really fast decks that try and almost combo out and win turn one or
Yeah.
more mid-range style decks. Tell me about some of the, I wouldn't say archetypes, but the landscape of what kind of decks exist. Are there control decks? What kind of decks exist in here? Like, what kind of strategies have you seen drafted?
Yeah. So obviously, like I said before, we have Balls Invoker, and that one's the I am trying to spend as little treasures as possible, put as few cards in my deck as I can, just so that way I can make sure that I get the Balls Invoker as the opener, have a few things to make sure that I can kind of resolve the Balls Invoker and make sure I have enough treasures to actually kill the table. Now, that is what I would say the biggest turn one type play. Then you also have the more control-y, grindier style decks where we have things like Cash Raiders, where at the beginning of your upkeep, you return a permanent you control back to your hand. You have Crystal Shard, which also just lets you toss a mana, so a blue, in order to tap and return a creature back to your hand. You can use it to bounce your opponent's things if they happen to not have any treasure or mana, but like that part's not super relevant. You're mostly using it to bounce your own thing. And then, of course, Salvager Secrets. So that way you can kind of loop your control pieces and make it so that way, hey, I'm just going to keep looping this stuff over and over. There is a burn discard deck that is focused around Rekindled Flame, Bandit's Talent, Liliana's Crest for the moment, but there are a few other ways that you can like forcibly discard your opponent's hand with things like Rule Draws Spectre, as an example, where it's just, hey, this is the typical Spectre thing of if it hits, then you have to discard a card, which, believe it or not, is extremely relevant when people don't have sustain to their hands. Other forms of decks are the Form of the Dragon control decks, where it is more focused around controlling the board state, making sure that there's no flyers, sticking down a Form of the Dragon. Once Burn's taken care of, once there's no more flyers, you just grab, say, Lightning Shrieker, Form of the Dragon, whatnot, and just make sure that nobody else can stick a flyer while you're just dealing potentially 5 to 10 damage every turn, depending on what you're trying to do. There are aggro strategies where it's just about taking as many level up creatures as you can, dropping them on the board, and then getting them huge. There was a particularly neat deck where if you take Smuggler Captain, which for those you don't know, it's a conspiracy card. The important part of this card, because the actual stats don't matter, you reveal it during the draft, and then whatever the next card you draft with it, you may note it. So what you do is you take the Smuggler's Captain and you can draft it with the Lightning Shrieker as an example. So every time that you play Smuggler's Captain, you just get the Lightning Shrieker for free. Then you replay Lightning Shrieker over and over and over again. And eventually you can just empty your deck and then just keep playing it. And you'll notice that there's a sort of like rock, paper, scissors thing going on here as well, where we have the Lightning Shrieker or the Burn decks beat the Form of the Dragon deck. The Form of the Dragon deck completely stomps the aggro deck. The control deck completely stomps the combo decks, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it really does feel like rock, paper, scissors in some ways. And I think that that's even more accentuated by the draft portion being face up.
Mm,
Because when somebody sees you take Lightning Shrieker, then they can prepare for it and take a good removal spell or a good creature counter spell. Tell me more about what the gameplay and the decks look like because players can really draft around each other. Like the
yeah,
Balls Invoker deck, when somebody sees somebody going for that deck, they could just take every counter spell they see or removal spell or protection spell. Or if they see somebody with Form of the Dragon, they could try and take burn spells to get them out quick.
yep.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, because there's that kind of open face draft, there's this sort of counterplay. In fact, counter picking people is actively encouraged here, where that's not typically an experience that you get with normal drafts, where counter picking is normally horrendous to do in just a normal draft. But in this particular case, there are times where it's just like, I see you're trying to go for this particular strategy. So I'm going to make sure that I can grab the piece that answers your strategy. And then people can kind of go in this turn order of being like, I see you're trying to go for this strategy. So I'm going to try to go for this strategy. And they kind of build and play off of each other until eventually they just have a deck. And eventually, if the person who let's say, draft the best or built their machine the best. Because have you ever played Slay the Spire?
No, I haven't.
So in Slay the Spire, a large part of it is trying to get your deck at just the right amount of cards to make sure that you do the thing consistently and you loop your cards. And there's a lot of decks that are centered around making sure that you're doing your thing consistently. For example, there is a 4 or 5 card minimum style deck where it is based around last chance, defabricate, salvager secrets, and so on and so forth, where the whole point of it is, hey, I'm just going to start taking infinite turns now. And if somebody is able to build that deck uncontested, then that's on the fault of the 3 other drafters. Like, the fact that it has actively engaged deck building and drafting at the same time makes it a very unique experience.
Absolutely. Like I've played grid draft many times, and I wouldn't say that I'm very good at it because I usually don't really pay attention to what my opponent has picked and
Mm,
just take cards that look good for my deck. But for example, Ryan, who was on a previous episode for Judge's Tower, he's
mm,
very good at grid draft. He's very much paying attention to what he thinks that you're taking and what you're drafting, and he will hate pick rows or columns from you. And I always get so annoyed at him. Why would you take that? There's nothing for your deck in there. What are you doing? And he'll be like, but I know you really need that card, so now you're screwed.
mm-hmm. Like, getting your opponent to have stranded cards in their deck is a legitimate force to consider. For example, Form of the Dragon on paper seems like a card that can completely centralize the draft. Because if it comes up early, people have to be able to draft either the flyers or the burn cards or some kind of answer cards to make sure that the Form of the Dragon player doesn't immediately like take over the game. So everybody else will start to try to dry up those pieces to make sure that the Form of the Dragon can't really do anything, stranding the Form of the Dragon player with just kind of a card that sits there. But what happens is that once you reach that kind of mid game and end game for this cube, relatively speaking, then Form of the Dragon starts to get better and better, because the longer you can wait to play that Form of the Dragon, the more and more screwed your opponents are. And it creates this kind of inverse dynamic to the environment. And Lord Ball's Invoker is the opposite, where it's, I'm trying to do a high committal play. I'm trying to invest as little as possible. I'm trying to do the treasure thing. And if I get stopped, I get stopped. Right.
I'm gonna go
So,
all in on this deck. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
yep. But point is that it is a weirdly textured draft because of, you have to pay attention to like what the actual cards do. What is the thing that you're trying to build for? And if you draft for just kind of, I'm just going to start picking good cards and then have like a pile of okay cards, you're not out of the game, so to speak. There's a lot of times where the people trying to do the strong, powerful things just get completely blown out because they're trying to do the big, scary thing immediately in the game, and then they can't really resolve anything. Or in the case of Form of the Dragon, where they're trying to wait for their moment, holding up the right pieces for the very last moments to make sure that nobody else can respond to the Form of the Dragon, stick it on the board and just go, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, right? And the people who kind of draft the good stuff piles, where we see Lord of Shatterskull Pass as an example, where it's just, I see you're trying to do weird loopy things with your creatures. I'm just going to nuke all of your creatures every turn.
Definitely.
And the fact that decking out like exists in here and it is actually a centralizing force, it means that something like Consumed by Greed, which is 1 black for an instant, gift a card, which is relevant. Target opponent sacrifices a creature with the greatest power among creatures they control. If a gift was promised, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. This is huge because, one, it's instant speed, make your opponent draw a card, which is enough to make them lose the game. Certain decks and strategies are particularly vulnerable to, I see you have no cards left. You die.
Wow.
And like I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to bring back my creature, and it's basically just a reanimate that I can use later.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The gift part of it being a downside for the
Yep.
opponent.
So there's a texture and there's a growth period that comes with playing this cube. And the phrase that I hear retorted a lot after people play it for the first time is, I now understand the assignment. Where when you first draft it, it's, I'm going to try to pick like good stuff. I'm going to try to be as efficient as I can with my treasures and kind of hold back. Then you start getting into the, no, my treasures are a resource. I need to use them to grab any of the good pieces that I can and then hope for the best. And then you start going full circle again of, I understand the assignment. I'm going to try to be as efficient as I can to very hone in on like these particular strategies. So there's like this skill ceiling that develops because of the cards that exist. And that's why, even though that this is like a really small list, each of these cards are important because they serve a very specific function. And that was what my point was earlier of yes, having things that serve multiple jobs is good, but having things that do one specific thing real well is more important in here.
Yeah, that creates a huge tension during the draft of this is like the one way to do this in the cube. But if my deck is only 12 cards or something, then I'll see it almost every time. So I better take it now before somebody else snaps it up because it's
Yeah.
super important for my deck.
Like for the aggro deck, what's particularly scary that's not immediately apparent? Crimson Mage, it is a 1 and a red for a 2/1 creature. You can spend a red, target creature you control gains haste. In a majority of other contexts, this is not a fantastic card, right? But in this specific case, in this cube, it is I'm going to drop a bunch of creatures, give them all haste, and then play Swashbuckler Extraordinaire, sacrificing treasures to give them all double strike. Of no, I'm swinging now.
Yeah, that's a crazy combo. I love that.
It
Really
is
cool.
deceptive on the ways that you can build your deck. And the more that you play it, the more creative you can get with it. And that's kind of the vibe that you can't get from other environments.
Yeah. And on a previous episode with Jamie Stone, we talked about the 15 card Highlander cube, which is also a
Mm.
micro cube where you draft a 15 card deck. And not running out of cards is really important for that cube also. And being able to accrue value is also super important. And I see a lot of similar effects in this cube to what he had, where trying to loop, like we talked about, trying to get additional value. For example, cards like Elixir of Immortality. It gives you
Mm-hmm.
life gain against the aggro decks, also recycles your deck. So, but there's another part to this cube that's not in the 15 card Highlander deck is even if you can loop your deck over and over again, if you run out of treasures, you run out of treasures.
Mm-hmm.
Or also Dogged Detective, being able to come back. Like we mentioned, Crystal Shard, one of my favorite cards ever, one of the best blink cards ever, but also a card that I hate to play against. And yeah, these sources of value seem like a really important part of this cube. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So when it comes to building value and trying to make sure that your deck can play the long game, I feel like is oftentimes more important than being able to do the scary turn one thing. Because the problem with doing the scary turn one thing is that everyone gets to play for free, which means you also have a bunch of things at instant speed that you have to keep in mind. So trying to slow roll it and wait for the like your moment, so to speak. So yeah, turn one, you could do the Crimson Mage, Swashbuckler, whatnot, and completely blow someone out. And maybe if somebody doesn't quite have what they need in order to get there, so to speak, then maybe you might be able to overtake that game. But the strength of that is the fact that you can do that when the moment's right. You don't have to invest into it until the right moment. So this kind of creates this sort of Mexican standoff, so to speak, where we are all holding back our big, scary, I win the game cards and trying to play just enough to put some pressure, get some cards without decking ourselves out.
Yeah, if everyone's just holding off and waiting to do their big thing and you're the one with one more card in your deck, then you got the most amount of guns in the chamber.
It's why like the burn discard deck is as scary as it is, because that is a deck that centers around I'm going to be emptying out people's hands to reduce your available options and then burn you directly, which will shut down any of the weird controlling nonsense with some forms of Form of the Dragon or sticking some big defensive creature or whatnot, where it is just straightforward. I'm shooting you in the face. I'm going to keep forcing you to discard cards. And then because you have no cards in hand, put this back into my hand and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that really reminds me of when I used to do a lot of Chaos Draft, and we would do multiplayer Chaos Draft,
Mm.
and you could play 40 as the minimum as per normal and draft, but we would always tell people we recommend probably playing 50, maybe 55 cards because it was amazing how many times it would come down to one person having 54 cards in their deck to start and the other person having 53, so they would deck out before the other. This reminds me a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. Like when you keep in mind that, sure, our initial draw period of I'm going to try to forcibly do the thing is going to be immediately met with, answers because we know what you're doing. We saw what you drafted. We drafted the answers, right? But then you have to ask, okay, now that that didn't work, how am I either going to keep repeating it to try it again? How am I going to protect it? How am I going to get back into this game? Oh, shoot, you just discarded my stuff. Oh, shoot, you just made me draw my last card. There's this weird kind of angle shooting. I don't think that that's quite the expression I'm going for, but you're essentially trying to find the right axis to attack your opponents on. It creates this cool little dance that I don't get to see much in any multiplayer format.
And another really interesting part about this cube and reading the write-up is the removal in this cube is described as being innately difficult to resolve. I was
Yep.
wondering if you could tell me more what you meant by that and why you feel it's important to make removal more difficult and not as powerful. Is it because if a player were to spend like 6 treasures on a Flame Blast Dragon and get Swords to Plowshares for 1 mana, that would just totally outbalance the treasure investments during the draft and lead to
Oh,
bad
absolutely.
gameplay?
So the thing about the way that my big spender is set up, and I don't think that my version of big spender is like the most optimal way of doing it or the most interesting way to do it, but the way that I chose to do it is that I wanted to pick high investment cards. I wanted cards that you wanted to spend a lot of like resources, time, whatnot to invest into. It's why there's a bunch of these level up creatures in here, for example, or like Flame Blast Dragon, or so on and so forth, where either you're paying a lot up front, so like Form of the Dragon, where you're paying a lot up front, but you have a lot of power just kind of sitting in your hand, waiting for the right moment, or you're paying something on the cheaper end at first, and then you can invest into it later once it's relevant. And what feels particularly bad is that if actual creature removal is too dense, too efficient, too whatnot, then there's only one actual murder in here. There's just murder. There's a bunch of things that interact on the stack. There's a bunch of things that stifle. There's a bunch of things that interact in various different ways. But there's only one murder in here. And that matters because I want people to be able to feel like that they can invest into their pieces without it immediately getting blown up. Like there was a period where I had Vampire Hexmage, and that one I had to remove out of here because let's be real, level up creatures are not very good. They're not very efficient, and you have to pay a lot before you get your money's worth, so to speak. Which is why there's this sort of like value engine built into it to be like, I'm going to try to cheat the cost or repeat these things in order to keep proliferating over and over and so on and so forth. But if removal was as prominent as it was, because sure, let's say you resolve the Balls Invoker, that murder's not going to make a difference anyways. That murder's not going to stop at Balls Invoker, right? I have lots of ways to interact on the stack. There's a lot of ways to like stifle that last trigger. There's a lot of ways to kind of strand the Balls Invoker, or I've actually unironically seen a game lost solely because they did the Balls Invoker and they all agreed to just let him do the thing until the very last trigger and then just stifle the last trigger. You're out of mana. Oops.
You still have a 4/2 to attack with.
Yeah, it's still a 4-2. But the point is that there's an angle that you're supposed to interact with in here, and removing your creatures is not like the main one. And the main ways that you're going to get that kind of big value stuff is through things like, say, Lord Shatterskull, right? Where it's like, this is big, sweepy, goodbye your board thing, but I have to pay a ton in order to get there. Form of the Dragon of, yes, I can remove a creature every turn, but like, I also have to make sure that I'm not going to get my face kicked in by burn. There is always some kind of counterplay, so to speak.
Yeah, and
So,
another part about this cube is that you just mentioned is it can be played single player or multiplayer.
yep, real fun in 1v1, real fun in multiplayer. I personally think that the multiplayer is the more fun experience of the two, where the 1v1's fun, it's fine. You can do whatever optimized thing that you're doing, and your opponent has to decide, am I going to proceed to advance my gameplay, or am I going to try to disrupt yours? And making that draft portion, the actual mini game, is what makes Big Spender Big Spender. Like the actual resolution stage, when you shuffle up and play, that is when I say you are trying to resolve your draft. You are trying to see if the thing that you drafted is good enough compared to other people's decks. Are you good enough to recognize what other people are drafting? Who's the scariest threat at the table? What you need to do, what you need to draft in order to disrupt the strongest things at the table. Are you trying to be the strongest thing at the table? And so on and so forth. Where a lot of the complexity comes from the actual draft section. The draft section is the mini game. That is the game.
I imagine it becomes significantly more difficult to try and hate draft strategies against three other players compared to
Oh yeah.
one.
Oh yeah.
Do the decks look very different when it's multiplayer?
Yes. I would definitely say that the decks look very different. One is that you're going to have the pieces that are significantly more contested. It's going to be so much harder to end up with these weird multi-part looping decks if somebody wants your piece for their deck, right? But more importantly, because every card is seen in the draft, there's never really a point in which somebody can't just wait for the proper answer for whatever's happening on the table or specifically optimizing what their choices are. It's why like the Salvagers of Secrets style decks are so strong is because they can pick all the answer cards without actually needing to put their plan behind.
Yeah. And with this cube, how it works also is that it's packs of nine, and players can take cards from the pack in order of player by paying treasures for it. But then, if nobody decides to take a card from that pack, it gets discarded.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me more about how you decided upon that, because in my Gold Rush cube, I tried a few different things where there's the shop in the center, and I had it at first that if nobody in a rotation takes a card from the center, then all the cards in the shop get discarded. And then I also, right now, I'm trying that I've liked that there's the six cards in the center, and if a player decides to take nothing, then the last card from the shop gets discarded and a new card comes in. So it's like a conveyor belt of cards coming out.
Yeah, I wanted to do it like one pack at a time rather than like one card at a time because I found that when you do it one card at a time, it leads to kind of feel bad moments where people will choose a card and then immediately the card that they would have wanted or the card that they would have chosen over it is the next card revealed. Or more importantly, it makes it so that way when people like the next person is trying to decide on what they want to pick, now they have to redecide on that new card when you can just have one consistent pack. And then once everyone's like, all right, I've decided I don't want any more from this pack. Everybody's decided they don't want any more. We can just sweep those cards off the table and get a fresh pack. Getting it all at once makes the play style consistent and it makes it readable for the rest of the table because making that draft section the consistent and compact version of the game style is extremely important.
That's really interesting. And tell me about what have been some of your favorite decks that you've seen drafted.
My favorite decks. Ooh, that's a good question. It might be the Lightning Shrieker deck.
That sounds really interesting, being able to repeatedly tutor it up.
Like, I remember the first time that I don't remember who did it, but they were so proud of themselves because they're like, I figured it out. I broke your environment. I made the infinite turns deck. And I'm just like, hell yeah, that's exactly what I want to see. That is the energy that we're looking for here. And if your three other opponents are letting you do that, then it's like, good job, you got it. And the advantage of the game portion being in the actual draft rather than the resolution stage is that the game itself is actually relatively quick to resolve. When we're looking at, say, the Lightning Shrieker deck, where it's, hey, the entire point of this deck is that I'm just trying to like loop out this big dumb dragon onto the board and then it'll just keep shuffling back into my deck, is that it actually solves a lot of problems in this environment. Like, oh no, I might deck out. Oh wait, just kidding, goes back to the deck. Or, oh no, someone played Form of the Dragon. Here's a Lightning Shrieker, and then I'm just going to kill the Form of the Dragon player. And then just hold up removal when they try to remove my Lightning Shrieker, and so on and so forth. But the whole point is that you're supposed to like pick certain, let's say, avenues of attack, and then you're trying to commit to that kind of gameplay as much as you can without leaving yourself open. And that's why I think the Lightning Shrieker deck's my favorite, just because it's the most Timmy Stompy style deck that exists in here, but it works because it specifically answers a lot of things.
What I would probably try and draft is just the most value, do nothing garbage deck of all time. Like I see
Cash
Chainer,
Raiders,
Nightmare
Mercurial
Adept,
Pretender, Salvager of Secrets. That's what I'd recommend for that.
Chainer, Loaming Shaman, Elixir of Immortality, just shuffle my deck back in, play a bunch of 1/1s, and try and be as efficient with my treasures as possible so I can just last forever. That
Yep.
sounds like a lot of fun too.
Yeah, unironically, being the last deck standing is oftentimes the most beneficial strategy in here. Going for the deck that wins the fastest does not usually win you the fastest. It's the decks that either can pick their moment or that can do their thing sustainably. Those are the decks that usually stick around.
Turn one Student of Warfare sounds pretty good too.
Oh yeah, turn one Student of Warfare is a spooky card. Not because you have to give it haste or anything, but just because this is an extremely efficient creature. You don't have to invest a ton into it for it to be a real card. So there are ways that you can do cheaty things with it, or you can just play it as a relatively cheap card.
The Mana Dorks deck also looks really interesting too, like taking Jiraga Tree Speaker, Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, being able to continuously loop cards and then not have to rely on the treasures.
Yeah, I'm still not sure if it's a trap, so to speak, but I do feel like that's the style of deck that I want to work in the most because when we have an environment that's mana is a limited resource and you have ways to generate mana, you can get around some of these weird things by adding, loopable things. And I feel like that's kind of important. Like if you can make 3 mana a turn for the crystal shard, then you can make a loopable deck.
Yeah, and take the lands too. Those are really important. Definitely.
Mm,
And May, let's jump into a pack one, pick one sort of from this pack.
sure.
So we got 9 cards in this pack. So how should we do this? Should we be that I'll say what I would take, you would say if you would take something?
Yeah. So I think the best way that we could do this is that you make a first pick, then I'll make a counter pick. And then I make a first pick, then you make a counter pick.
Oh, let's do it. Let's do it. So I'll read off the pack here. We got Crimson Mage, which is 1 red for a 2/1 that you can pay a red and give something haste. Pretty powerful, like we talked about for that just all in turn one mega kill super death. And then we have Hedron Archive, mana rock that can tap for 2 mana. So like we were talking about those more grindy long-term decks, that seems really important to not have to rely as much on
There's also
treasures.
a mana dump that lets you draw cards.
Yeah, it also draws cards too, which is great. Then we have Ravenous Sailback, which is a 4 and a green for a 3/4 that can be like a Rex Age, or it can get haste and just get in there in a more aggressive deck. Watley's Raptor, which is a green and a white for a 2/3 vigilance, and when it enters, you proliferate, which is really important here with all the level up creatures. Being able to proliferate all those level up creatures seems really important and really powerful. Then we have Dogged Detective, 1 and a black for a 2/1. When he enters, surveil 2, and whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you can return him from a graveyard to the hand. We have Minimus Containment. That's funny. Enchant non-land permanent for 2 and a white, and it becomes a treasure. So you're giving him mana. It's great. It's kind of like a murder, but any non-land permanent is really good.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Lord of Shatterskull Pass, which is 3 and a red for a 3/3, like we talked about. And then if you fully level it up on level 6, it becomes the 6/6 that board wipes your opponent repeatedly. Mischievous Pup, 2 and a white, 3/1 flash. When it enters, return up to 2 target permanents you control to its owner's hand. That's the blink stuff I like. And then we have Mindstone, which is basically the mini Hedron Archive. 2 mana taps for 1, or you can sack it to draw a card by paying 1. So how about you do the picking first?
All right. So my first pick would probably be Lord of Shatterskull Pass. 2 reasons. One is that I am establishing to myself that I'm investing a slot to dedicate removing your stuff, and I'm either saying pick the Crimson Mage and try to out aggro me, or I'm picking the Crimson Mage and I'm going to wipe your stuff. If we're doing a 1v1 thing, if you're just second pick in a multiplayer, it also is just a threatening card that I can pick for relatively cheap. I know that there's the Raptor in here that I'll be able to maybe get a hold of later because just removing the temptation of a level up creature is fine enough. If somebody decides to go for that proliferate without really a way to like capitalize on it, then they're having to take essentially a worse card in order to counterpick me, right? So
Yeah,
it threatens a lot. It has low opportunity cost.
there's some really interesting cards, but I think to respond to you, I would probably take the Minimus Containment then.
Yep.
But if you also then took Crimson Mage, then my Minimus Containment being a sorcery speed removal doesn't help too much.
Mm-hmm.
If you go all in on it, definitely. Would you take something else after I took Minimus Containment?
I'd probably still just take either the Crimson Mage or the Hades Raptor, depending on what the next two people did. If it's 1v1, then I'd definitely take the Crimson Mage.
Makes sense. I think if I was going first, I would probably take Watley's Raptor. That just seems like such a fun build around to take a ton of level up creatures, drop them all turn one. Watley's Raptor that basically would, if let's say if I had 3 level up creatures, would generate like 3 mana. That seems really fun.
It's a
Powerful.
super fun deck.
Yeah.
It's very good. In response to that, I actually don't think that I would take the Lord of Shatterskull pass first and like just not contest with you on that axis. Instead, I would probably go for the Dog Detective.
Hmm.
So the reason why is that being able to surveil two when you have such a small deck list basically either makes it so that way I can guarantee certain cards are in the graveyard. I can guarantee whatever the next card that I'm going to draw is going to be something important. Or the third most important thing of I'm punishing you from being able to do weird drawing whatnots. So I'm essentially shutting out the value things in a 1v1. But in a multiplayer, Dog Detective I would take in response. One, because it would be a lane that you're not going to be seeing a ton of in this pack. So being able to just fill my graveyard with miscellaneous things that I can bring back with the Salvager Secrets and whatnot, I can go for the kind of long-term game plan of I am trying to efficiently dig out my dumb stuff and attack you on an axis that your aggro is not going to matter anymore.
Another pick I'd be really tempted to do is take Hedron Archive and try and wield the Mind Stone. That sounds so fun. It'd just be this big mana deck.
Oh yeah, like there's unironically a deck that is just based around looping cards like Mindstone, Hedron Archive, whatnot, so that we can just keep looping them, keep drawing cards, and then plays things like Flick a Coin and whatnot. So it's just like I'm gonna flick a coin to deal one, make a treasure, and then I'm gonna keep looping this Flick a Coin in my deck by
Yeah,
just making mana, sacrificing the rock to draw cards again, and then replaying the Flick a Coin.
that sounds great.
That deck hasn't like done its thing yet, but I'm hoping it does someday.
I hope so too. That sounds awesome. And May, it's been great having you on the show again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Anything you want to say before we wrap up this time?
Yeah. Experiment with different cube types. There's lots of different ways that you can play cube, play draft, and play with your game pieces. Embrace things that aren't just magic enough.
I mentioned it before we started recording. I just love cubes that change the rules of the game, and it's so fun. Totally recontextualize all the cards.
I think that your ability to recontextualize cards is a skill. And I think that anything that lets you hone that is a good thing.
Definitely. And everyone, go listen to Uber Cube. Great show. And hope to see you all next week. Please like, subscribe, follow, all that fun stuff, and have a great day.